80 years ago, in the spring of 1944, on the border between modern-day Myanmar and the states of Manipur and Nagaland in northeast India, Japanese and British forces fought in what is regarded as some of the fiercest clashes of World War II. The Battle of Imphal in Manipur and the Battle of Kohima in Nagaland are now regarded as one of the crucial turning points in the Asia-Pacific War, marking a brutal defeat of Japanese forces as they sought to invade India. In the intervening decades, the Allied perspectives of these events has been widely shared in English, with the battles even being voted as Britain's greatest battle by the British National Army Museum. However, the Japanese perspective of these battles is less widely known, as English translations of Japanese sources are rarely available. This brings us to our conversation with Dr. Haruo Tohmatsu, Professor of Diplomatic and War History at the National Defense Academy. He led the project to translate a selection from Japan's war records, which is called the Senshi Sosho in Japanese. This is perhaps the first time that these important materials covering the Japanese campaign in northeast India have been made available in English. As we near the conclusion of this translation project, we're pleased to share our original conversation with Dr. Tohmatsu, which was recorded in New Delhi during the initial book launch for the Senshi Sosho translation in 2022, followed by a quick update recorded more recently in Japan. To set the stage for a conversation, could you first provide some background about the Senshi Sosho?
Senshi Sosho is a sort of a de facto official history of the Asia-Pacific War and part of the Sino-Japanese War. It's more than 100 volumes, and each volume has more than several hundred pages. So it was a huge project in the 1960s and 1970s. And this was compiled by experts in the defense agency at that time. However, I said de facto official history. It doesn't mean that it was commissioned by the government to professional historians. So there are some shortcomings and limitations due to this nature. However, why there wasn't any genuine official history of the Asia-Pacific War possible in Japan was because it had something to do with perception or evaluation of the past war history of Japan. So in the 1960s and 1970s, there were strong anti-war feelings, and also there was strong prejudice towards talking about or studying about war or military affairs in Japan. On the other hand, the defense agency needed some materials to teach their staffs and officers, and that was why it was organized and executed by defense agency people to gather materials and write the narratives of Asia-Pacific War. So due to this nature, I have to say that overall it was a great project, but it depends on which volume you look at. And some volumes are really well written and even matches academic standard. However, some volumes are simply a chronology of the facts. And this is because the people who wrote these volumes are not professionally trained historians. They were officers or archivists at that time. But still, I have to emphasize that if this project wasn't executed in the 1960s and 1970s, it was almost impossible to gather very important materials and documents and also oral testimonies from those people who were involved in these affairs.
How does the Operation Imphal section fit into this overall document? And why was it selected to be translated into English?
When I heard about the creation of Imphal Peace Museum and people in this museum looking for a very serious project for the future, well, I thought that the first thing we have to do is to provide wide readers and researchers and people interested in this matter most important sources on the Japanese side. And it is obviously the Senshi Sosho volume on Imphal Operation Imphal. It is titled Operation Imphal. However, it is about the Battle of Imphal and Kohima, which was fought in the spring to summer of 1944 in the Burmese-Indian border. The literature written in English language by English scholars or journalists, but some of them were the veterans from that part of the war. These books and articles have wider currency well, needless to say, because they are written in English language and published by publishers in United Kingdom or United States. And on the other hand, from the Japanese side, there are tremendous amount of memoirs and books and articles and novels and even documentary films and some how to say, dramas and films on the Battle of Imphal and Kohima. However, that is only limited to Japan. So there are abundant literature on this issue in Japanese language. However, almost none of them are translated into foreign language and made readable to scholars and specialists and readers outside Japan. So there's a great gap between the stories told by the British side and stories told from the Japanese side. And of course, there's also one very important missing link, which is Indian side. In the past 50 years, there have been a number of interesting studies, serious researches in Japanese language. And I thought it is also important to introduce those outcomes on the Japanese side to foreign readers. Well, unfortunately, we couldn't make translation of all of them, but in the introduction of this Operation Imphal translation project, I tried to cover and introduce some of the most important sources and articles and books on Operation Imphal and related subjects so that foreign readers and researchers can look at. And also, I asked some of my colleagues, academic colleagues, to write more specialized articles on specific issues related to Operation Imphal, such as the composition of the Japanese military at that time, or managerial and legal aspects of the failure on the Japanese side, or air operations, or also memory of the war in post-war Japan about Operation Imphal. So they are also included in the introduction part of this volume. I can understand that most people see the Battle of Kohima and Imphal basically Anglo-Japanese issue. Yeah, because it was a Great Britain and Japanese Empire who fought over Burma and part of India in 1944. So it was a kind of a confrontation between the old empire, the British Empire, and the new empire, the Japanese Empire, over domination of Southeast Asia. Well, that was one of the features of the Asia-Pacific War. However, actual battles were fought on the soil of present-day India. Well, at that time, it was British India. And, well, as you see, Imphal is in Manipur, and Kohima is in Nagaland. And nowadays, it is seen as a northeastern region of India. So one has to remember that those people who actually fought in these two cities and their surrounding areas, on the one hand, they were Japanese soldiers. On the other hand, it was the British forces. In those days, it was British India. However, from British India, not only India, but also Pakistan was created. And also, nowadays, part of Pakistan became Bangladesh. And on the British side, there were Gurkhas, I mean, those people recruited in Nepal. And there were even forces recruited in Africa. So which means that British forces fought in Burma, India and Burma, were very multi-ethnic, multinational forces. And which means that for those people from those regions, it was perhaps the first contact with the Japanese in a very dramatic and drastic way, which was, I mean, the contact in the battlefield. So that was their first Japan experience. I often say that there hasn't been any war between independent India and Japan. However, Indians and Japanese actually fought in the battleground in one of the fiercest battles of the Second World War. And also, one has to remember that on the Japanese side, although majority of the Japanese forces were Japanese soldiers, however, quite impressive number of Indians also participated in this battle on the Japanese side. Well, they were Indian National Army led by Subhash Chandra Bose. So, well, their military contribution was still quite limited, I have to say. However, having such an eminent figure like Chandra Bose on Japanese side did have some political impact on Anglo-Indian relations and Japan-India relations. And also, probably the recent studies really tell that the political aspect of this battle was much more important than once it was thought.
I'd like to go back to the point you brought up, which is the fact that while the Battle of Imphal and Battle of Kohima were fought by the British and Japanese, the British army that was actually fighting in these battles was predominantly composed of British Indian soldiers, and the Japanese troops at times were also fighting alongside the Indian National Army, or INA. Japan was also supporting the independence movement of Chandra Bose, who at that time was also the head of the Azad Hind, or the Provisional Government of Free India. With this in mind, what is the significance of making these specific war records from Japan available in English and accessible to an English-speaking audience?
I'm not the Indian expert myself, so perhaps my knowledge is very limited. But however, from a historical point of view, I must say that Azad Hind's enterprise to liberate India from British by using force failed because the Japanese failed to take Imphal, and the Japanese Empire as a whole was defeated in the war. And also the leader, Subhash Chandra Bose, was killed in a plane accident in August 1945, and Azad Hind and INA, International Army, was dissolved. So in that sense, it was a failure. But however, looking at history from a more wider perspective and longer time span, we know that one of the major causes of British quitting India in 1947 was that INA trials in 1945 and 1946, because at that time the British authority in India tried former INA officers as traitors. But when they were sentenced for very heavy toll, actually many Indian people were outraged by British decision to punish these former INA officers. And even those people who belonged to the Indian Army, British Indian Army, who fought INA on the battlefield, even those people were angry about British decision to try and punish INA officers. So I really feel a complex history of Indian independence, that former enemies who fought in the battles of Imphal and Kohima and other battles in Burma, those people actually had this common feeling of belonging to the same nation or same state. So actually the British Indian soldiers actually supported their former enemy, INA people, when they protested to British in 1945-1946 trial. I think I'm not wrong to say that the British failure to punish INA former officers through this trial was a catalyst, one of the catalysts of Indian independence in 1947. And the origin of this catalyst goes back to Battle of Imphal and Kohima, in which Azad Hind and INA took serious part. So I think from that point of view, what happened in the Battle of Kohima and Imphal in 1944, and what kind of things that INA and Azad Hind people are doing at that time, is really extremely important part of independence of India. From that point of view, I believe that we Japanese must provide most important resources on Battle of Imphal and Kohima, chiefly from the Japanese side.
Can you think of any significance or any lessons that you think might be drawn in a broader sense from this translation project?
To understand history, you needed to have both bird's eye view and ant's eye view. And academics tend to look things from bird's eye view, well, which is very important. Important to know political background, diplomatic history, social conditions, economic factors. That's also very important. But on the other hand, ant's eye view is indispensable. In what condition did these soldiers actually fought? And under such circumstances, what local people saw and experienced in daily life? That really matters a lot. Let me give you one example. Well, in this Senshi Sosho translation, one of the impressive part is that in the first part of the operation, Japanese were quite successful and were able to capture many British materials on the battleground, and some of them actually included foods. And the Japanese had to rely on captured foods. But however, when they occupied the depot, of British depot, majority of materials, edible material there were raw, and that was for Indian soldiers to make naan. And I think the Indian soldiers were happy about having naan, but Japanese soldiers didn't like naan, and they wanted to have rice. So although they had a great amount of flour, they started starving because they didn't have rice. This sort of things really matters in the battlefield. Also, in some Japanese document, it says that by this time, probably all the ammunition was run out. However, some Japanese forces were still bombarding British sites. And why was it possible? It was because Japanese captured a huge amount of British weapons and ammunition. But we don't know much about what particular weapons they captured, how many they captured, what was the amount of ammunition they were able to use. We don't know much about the detail. And probably we have to understand this, we have to get lots of bits and pieces together from various documents written or made by individuals. So you cannot find this information in bird's eye view history. You have to go down to the ants-eye history, or kind of a history, not the history, but has a more comprehensive picture of the whole thing. We have to know why Japanese disliked war, and why they weren't able to get rice. And we have to know what type of weapons did Japanese capture, how many of them, what was the amount of the ammunition rounds. Some people might say that it's too specialized or too specific, but you have to, you cannot neglect small pieces to understand larger picture. And that is something you might come across when you read through Senshi Sosho translation.
But shortly you will be traveling to Imphal, which is, of course, an area that you've been focusing on in this translation project and in your academic work. But this will be the first time that you'll actually be traveling to the region. What are your hopes or expectations for visiting Imphal for the first time?
First of all, understanding something only through reading is very, limited. I mean, if you read in textbooks or any kind of, written media about, okay, how many kilometers from this point to that point, or how high the hill is and what kind of river it was. Well, to a certain extent, I can imagine what it was like. However, if you actually go to the spot, you will discover many other things which you couldn't imagine only through reading documents or writings. So in that sense, I'm very much interested in going to the actual site where all those things happened. And I actually want to walk a little bit. I don't think I can walk several hundred kilometers with 30 kilograms of equipment like Japanese soldiers did. I don't think I can do that nowadays. But also, I think you can imagine what sort of hardships that soldiers on both sides went through, in particular geographical landscape. And that is one thing I really expect to do. And secondly, I'm very much interested in how history is displayed in the Imphal Peace Museum, because how to display history in museums have become a very important issue, a very political, social issue. Memory of history can be a strong component in people's national identity or community identity. So from that point of view, I really want to know what kind of impact did these battles had on local people, how memories are passed to next generation, how it is remembered, and what sort of feelings did it create.
With that, we're now going to jump ahead in time a bit. Our last interview was back in the winter of 2022 when we were together in India, but now I'm here with Dr. Tohmatsu in the summer of 2024, and we are back in Japan. Given the amount of time that's passed, I'm hoping that you can give us an update about what's been happening with this project since our last conversation.
For the past year and a half, after my visit to India in December 2022, by that time, we were almost finished with the basic translation of the text of Senshi Sosho, the volume on the battles of Imphal and Kohima. However, we took more time in double check, triple check the texts so that we convey accurate meaning of the original text of Senshi Sosho to readers. We were very careful about going through this process because this will be the very basic material for future educational academic projects of Peace Museum. So we didn't want to make second-rate product. We really wanted to make the very best product for this program. In addition, we made a very detailed index of the names of places, names of the people, important operations, meetings, etc. And picking up important words from voluminous text was a very painstaking work. And also, it is not only about picking up words, but also we have to consider the present situation in Northeast India, where there are many minority tribe people living. And those people have different interpretation of their own history. And also, they call the same place with different names. Place names are very important. So we exchanged ideas, and also we asked intellectual people in Northeast India to help us in filing up this index. We double-checked, triple-checked the names of the places, and some places are no longer there because some small villages or towns do not exist now when they existed in 1944. And also Japanese and British and Indian call the same place with different names. We wanted to make sure what this particular place was. And we tried to put in our index that if there are more than 2 or 3 ways of calling the town or village, we try to put all the names on the index. This took a lot of time. In addition, we also revised maps, which was attached to the original Senshi Sosho text, but some maps are really outdated. So we wanted to update the maps, and we also wanted to check the names on the maps, sometimes which were not accurate, because we have to remember Senshi Sosho was edited in 1967, 1968, that period. And in those days, it was very difficult for the Japanese or any foreigners to go to northeast part of India. There was no direct contact with Northeast Indian people and the Japanese people at that time. So there wasn't much information around regarding the place names of Northeast India when Senshi Sosho was edited. So most of the names come from how Japanese called the name in 1944. But we have to check what those places were called in present-day India. So people from Northeast India, people of the Peace Museum, and also journalists and academics from that region provided us with latest information regarding place names. Putting all this information into index and also maps also took long painstaking hours. Fortunately, all those things will be put together in a month or 2. And I'm really happy now. We are really close to wrapping up the project.
That was our conversation with Dr. Haruo Tohmatsu, Professor of Diplomatic and War History at the National Defense Academy. For more information about the Imphal Peace Museum or the Senshi Sosho Translation Project, visit the links in the show notes on our website. Special thanks to Dr. Tohmatsu and to everyone involved in the Imphal Peace Museum and Senshi Sosho Translation Project. Thanks for joining us, and we'll see you next time.